Today we're going to talk a little bit about the 2030 challenge, what it means, how it maybe relates to some other things out there. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about some energy and environmental performance tools with Insight 360, which is a new tool that definitely has some 2030 benchmarks and reporting capabilities built into it that can help you achieve some of these goals. So let's get started. The Architecture 2030 Challenge. I just wanted to take a moment, just in case we have anyone on the line who maybe has heard about it but isn't sure exactly what it means, just to talk about the 2030 Challenge. So, basically what we're working towards is all new buildings, development, major renovations are going to be carbon neutral by the year 2030. That is the ethos of the 2030 Challenge. And it's specifically focused on lowering building energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. To help us get there, it's not going to just be we're at zero by 2030. There are some steps and increments. This 70% reduction is today, specifically the year 2015 is requiring a 70% reduction. By 2020, we're looking at an 80% reduction in fossil fuel energy use, and so on till we get to 2030. Now there's this piece of renewables built in here. Of course, you know, in some climates and given some projects, we're not going to be able to be carbon neutral without the help of renewables. That being said, our whole project should not be renewables. We should try to design an energy efficient building before relying on renewables. Now, who has adopted the 2030 Challenge? The first adopter was the American Institute of Architects, AIA, and there are over 80,000 members. This is great. We also have a lot of other people adopting the 2030 Challenge, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, U.S. Green Building Council, ASHRAE, a lot of these are familiar, and a lot of these are also starting to become international. So it's really great to see the Architecture 2030 Challenge being adopted not only locally, but globally. Governments at all levels have also risen to the 2030 Challenge and have started to adopt it and integrate it. You'll see a lot of messaging around 2030 districts. Specific cities are trying to target the 2030 goals. A big piece, 73% of the 20 largest architecture and engineering firms who are responsible for over $100 billion in construction annually have now adopted and are implementing the 2030 Challenge goals. This is great. As you said, they're doing $100 billion of business and construction annually. So to be able to have them on board is also excellent. Also, a recent poll by Design Futures found that approximately 40% of all U.S. architecture firms have adopted the challenge. So we see a lot of people starting to adopt this. It's growing in momentum. Architecture 2030 and the AIA are working together to produce courses and training to teach people how to use this. And on our side, on the Autodesk side, we're working on tools that can help designers and engineers understand these goals and how they fit into their design process. Before I get into that, I just want to spend a minute talking about the Architecture 2030 Challenge and the AIA 2030 Commitment. It's possible you've heard of maybe one of these or the other. Maybe you know they're separate things or they kind of do bleed together, so it's definitely, it can be confusing. I just want to clarify a little bit because I think this might be helpful. So the main difference between the 2030 Challenge from Architecture 2030 and the AIA 2030 Commitment is really the scope. So the 2030 Challenge is focused specifically on lowering building energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. The 2030 Challenge is the core of the AIA 2030 Commitment. Like its namesake, AIA 2030 Commitment, it applies only to AIA members, and it also incorporates issues such as water and indoor air quality. It also has action plans, so if a firm signs up for the AIA 2030 Commitment, they're required to produce documentation that shows how is their firm going to react and shift their practice to accommodate these goals. It's also asking for for firms to report their progress. So there's actually a site, this next image, the AIA 2030 Design Data Exchange. I'll probably call it the DDX for the rest of this presentation. And this is an online catalog, essentially, where firms can report their progress towards the 2030 benchmark goals. So, for example, you can start to see what the goal is, where your building is stacking up, and the savings. Now, all AIA 2030 commitment firms are required to enter this data into the Design Data Exchange, the DDX. Recently, the AIA 2030 commitment published a progress report reflecting back on the year 2014, and it provided a lot of really great information. This is freely available online. If you're interested in knowing more about how firms are adopting these goals, I highly recommend. This is a free download you can get from the 2030 commitment site. But it's giving us a lot of great insight as to how firms are approaching these goals. Are they being successful in reaching them? And it's really valuable for us to understand, us being Autodesk, how we can start to help users accommodate and reach these goals easier. So here's a great finding from that progress report of 2014. Energy simulation is the key to meeting the 2030 challenge goals. Now, the 2030 challenge goals are the exact same as the 2030 commitment goals in terms of reductions and where we need to be by 2030. And basically what this means is they looked at projects that had energy models and did an energy simulation, and they looked at projects that didn't. And the projects that had an energy model and were doing energy simulation, they met the goal exceedingly more often than projects that were not having the energy simulation or energy model done. 80% of non-modeled projects failed to meet the 40% reduction goal. Now we're in 2015, so we're looking at 70% reduction. 80% of those projects that weren't modeled couldn't even meet that 2015 goal. They couldn't even meet a 40% reduction. This is another great kind of comparison chart from that 2014 progress report. Only 44% of projects were modeled in the early design phases. We all know that the design decisions that are made early in the process, such as your orientation, your massing, your window-to-wall ratio, those are going to have the greatest impact on your building's energy performance. So only 44% of projects were modeled in the early design stages. So that's a pretty big missed opportunity. A lot of the projects, more of the projects were modeled in the later design stages and had an energy model, but by that point it's too late to really improve upon the findings of an energy simulation. So the next thing I want to share are some, Architecture 2030 has provided some implementation guidelines to help firms deploy adoption, whether you're signed up for the Architecture 2030 Challenge or the AIA 2030 Commitment. These tenets ring pretty true to being able to successfully adopt and integrate these goals into your practice. The first one is establish energy efficiency as a central tenet of your design philosophy. This one's kind of a no-brainer, but we really all have to be on the same page if we want to reach these goals, and that's internally in our firms. You know, we all have to be committed to reaching this goal. Second one, require that all employees become educated in the design of energy efficient buildings. This one is great, although it's kind of hard. You know, some people aren't going to be experts in energy efficient buildings and the design process of those specific kinds of buildings. And in the past, that's been a hindrance. You know, if you didn't have that expert knowledge, you couldn't really, really fully maximize it. But that's changing, and we're working on tools that can deliver expert knowledge and inform design decisions to maybe the novice. Maybe it's someone who's just getting started. Third, engage clients in discussions relating to energy efficiency. This one's also great. You know, if the client's not really committed and on board, it might be harder to push those energy efficient design decisions without them really wanting to commit to it. So bringing them into the conversation, a little bit easier said than done, but I'm going to show you some tools that hopefully will help them get on board with your clients and owners get more on board with the energy efficient design decisions. And lastly, approach every project with an energy focus and review the project for further energy reductions at every stage of development. This is perhaps the most important because oftentimes, traditionally when we think about energy modeling, it's oftentimes for compliance, for checking that box at the end of the design process, making sure we're meeting our local codes and standards. And while this is important, like I mentioned earlier, it really is starting to get too late in the design process. If we're doing an energy model on a fully detailed building, what are we going to learn from it? We might learn that the design decisions we made weren't as effective as they could be, but we're too late in the design process to change them. So this is really important, bringing design and energy simulation as early in the design process as possible. Now, Insight 360, what is it? So Insight 360 is an energy and environmental performance tool that we released last year at Greenbuild in November. Greenbuild's a very important event to us. It's where we launch or we announce major updates and announcements relating to energy and environmental performance tools here at Autodesk. We'll be there this year in October in Los Angeles. If you're there, definitely do stop by the Autodesk booth and say hi to us. But a lot of these tools, energy and environmental performance, have existed for several years now from Autodesk. You might be familiar with them as energy analysis tools in Revit or lighting analysis tools in Revit. And really what Insight 360 is it's a more holistic and integrated approach to energy and environmental performance. So what we did was we took all of those existing tools and we put them under a new wrapper and expanded on the capabilities greatly. So they're providing a more integrated design experience with your design environment and together themselves also. I'm just going to give you a quick little overview of Insight 360. Then I'm just going to hop over to the tool itself and show you exactly how it works in a live demonstration. So what is Insight 360 doing? Whole system thermal dynamics. This is important. Understanding building energy use can be complex. We have a lot of things we need to consider. It's a lot of physics and a lot of equations, and we're working to automate all of that for you. So you don't have to worry about what's going on in the back end. If you want to, you can certainly dive into the back end, but for the most part, full thermal dynamic simulation is going on, and you just need to worry about what's going on with your geometry, your location, and we'll take care of the rest for you. Now, Insight 360 is more than just those whole system thermal dynamics. We're also talking about stakeholder engagement. So oftentimes these energy modeling and simulation tools are really powerful for the MEP engineer or the energy analyst. But we want to bring others into the discussion. I mentioned owners and clients, and that was part of the 2030 tenets, is engage your client. We also want to start to engage the architect. So we want the architect to have a tool that they can use in the earliest design stages. So by the time the MEP or the energy analyst comes along, they're seeing design decisions that were made with good information, that are founded on strong principles. We're also talking about design process continuity. Now this is leveraging that 2030 tenet around at every stage of design. So we don't want to build a tool that just works on the detailed Revit models at the end stage, and we don't want to build a tool that only works on simple masses. We want a tool that spans the design process and lets you analyze and check in on your building's performance progress throughout the way. Now these are just some of the capabilities of Insight 360. Like I said, I'm just going to review these quickly and then we'll just dive into the tool itself. But this is one of the main interfaces from Insight 360, and it's allowing you to visualize and interact with key performance indicators. We're only human and we have deadlines. There's only so much time in the day and on a specific project that we're going to be able to test different design options. So what we're doing with Insight 360 is what we call it outcome-driven inputs. So rather than you specify everything in great detail up front, even for a basic conceptual math, We're just going to ask you to provide geometry and set your location, and then we're going to deliver all those different options to you that you can work in with an interface. That'll become more clear in the demonstration. We're also using industry-leading engines that are leveraging cloud for fast computing. We're leveraging DOE 2.2 as well as Energy Plus. And if you've ever done any work with Energy Model, and you know DOE 2 and Energy Plus are pretty much the standard engines out there. Most of the tools on the market are using them or using one or the other. We're actually using both. And the fast cloud computing is critical because it means we're getting you results when you need them, when you need to make a design decision, not 6 weeks later when you had to make a decision yesterday. So organizing and sharing insights with key stakeholders, this is extremely important to get everyone's buy-in and to make everyone part of the discussion and conversation, especially as it comes to trade-offs and understanding, well, you know, we can remove those shades if we need to save on cost, but here's what the implications are going to be if we remove those shades in terms of energy performance. Accessing performance data when it's needed. So this is very important and leveraging part of the cloud computing. Since Insight 360 is cloud-based, it's really great because once you submit your model from Revit or Formit, it means you don't have to have Revit or Formit anymore to access those results. This is really important, especially when we want to start talking to the client and the owner. They probably don't have Revit on their machine, but the fact that you can just send them a link, help them check in on their performance and show them in live, real time what's going on with their model data is really valuable. And this last one is important for the topic for today. So that AIA 2030 Design Data Exchange, if you are a 2030 commitment firm, you know that you have to provide the Design Data Exchange, the DDX. You have to add your project performance and updates there. You also know that it's a very manual process. We talk to a lot of firms and they kind of show us all the spreadsheets that they keep track of it, and then it's one poor person's job at the end of the year to manually upload all this information and enter it all. So we've automated that. You know, your job should be about designing and understanding a great building. It should not be about manual data entry. So we've automated that AIA 2030 DDX reporting from Insight 360. You just have to press a button and all your in-project information will go directly into the Design Data Exchange, and I'll show you that as well. So how does Insight 360 work? It's integrated with the design environment. It's working with Revit 2016 and above, as well as Formit 360 Pro. I'm going to show you a little bit of both today, but basically what's required is we're just asking you to provide geometry. You don't have to build it in a special way. You know, we worked really hard to make it really robust and accept a lot of different forms. We all know in Revit there's more than one way to do the same thing. So there's certainly, you know, upwards of 10 different ways that you can design the same building and build it out and model it in Revit. So we're trying to be very versatile and accept a range of inputs that way. From there, providing your geometry and selecting your location, then you can start to have access to all of this great information, understanding benchmarks, your project's performance, comparing different design options in real time without you having to modify your project geometry. You can also start to get visual in-context information such as solar analysis and daylighting analysis. So I'm going to stop talking there, and rather than me kind of talking about all the great things it does, I'm just going to start to show you directly. So I'm going to start in Formit. If you've never used Formit or you maybe haven't heard of it, Formit is a conceptual modeling environment. You can see it's pretty lightweight. I've made some very simple masses in there. And I did these simple masses not because that's the limitation of Formit, but I want to show you how easy it is to get early performance data. Now, Formit is browser-based. You can use it on a tablet. And there's also a Windows application that you can download. That's what I'm using today. However, all three of those applications have the access to Insight 360. You just need to have the Pro subscription. So in this format model, I've made some very, very simple math, and again, that you can build. If you've ever tuned into a Format Friday with Tom Villaro and Tobias Hawthorne from the Format team, you've seen you can do some really beautiful and amazing stuff with Format. I'm starting with just a really simple math because, again, I want to show you how easy it is to get performance information on really simple models, and I'll also show you a more detailed example. So I have my format model, I've set my location, I've imported some site information, I've also built some surrounding buildings. That's just because I want to use it for my project. After that, it's really quite simple. This value here, this energy analysis, the first thing I'm going to push is just generate insight. Now, I haven't specified if there's windows anywhere. You can see there's no windows modeled here. I haven't specified a building type or what the interior space looks like. I haven't done any zoning. I haven't really done anything. This is literally just a box and a location. Now, once I press Generate Insight, that's going to submit this geometry to Insight 360. And from there, what we'll start to do is we'll start to play around and see the results. So Insight 360, when you're done, this model will just take a minute or so to run. And then you can press View Insight, and that will take you to this interface. You can also just log in directly to insight360.autodesk.com. Now, I submitted a few matches ahead of time because I wanted to show you some of the flexibility and the capabilities. So let's start with this one math here. And so now we're going to work in the Insight 360 interface. So this is specifically going to be all of the information for that model. Now I can see the model here, so that's that same horseshoe model. You know, some of the examples, I can have matches in the background. On this example, I didn't want to, because I wanted to focus on this geometry right here. But if you do build in surrounding context, it will consider it. That's really important to know. So you can see that geometry that I had in a format. I hadn't specified windows or anything, but you can see Insight 360 started to put on some baseline assumptions, and we can change those as well. Now let's get familiar with the interface here. This number in the corner is our energy cost range, and right now we're looking at the energy mean. This is a metric of US dollars per square foot. We can also just click on it and flip it around, and that will go to energy use intensity, EUI, and that's going to be kBTU per square foot. I like working in energy costs, and part of the reason for that is, you remember that 2030 tenet, which is about interacting with the clients and getting them on board. Clients and owners absolutely understand cost. They might not understand EUI. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But everyone understands dollar signs. So it's a great metric to work with, especially when you're working with your client and you want to get them on board with some energy cost-saving measures. Now this benchmark comparison piece here, this is where you're seeing where your building's performance is stacking up to industry benchmarks. So we have ASHRAE 90.1. This is a 2010 baseline. We also have Architecture 2030. So we've built in the Architecture 2030 benchmark so you can very quickly see, are you going to be meeting those goals? And right now, we're not. I will admit freely on air, on the record, this is totally gamified. This little dial does not turn green until you hit your Architecture 2030 benchmark, and that's because that's where we want everyone to be. We want to encourage 2030 benchmarks because that's really where the industry needs to be in terms of performance. So right now we're at orange, which means we've met ASHRAE 90.1, but we still have a ways to go in terms of performance. This model history, I'm going to come back to this. It's going to make some more sense after we talk a little bit about and we see the interaction model of Insight 360. But now what we see down here is just a range of different factors. That's what we call these. Things like operating schedule, lighting efficiency, window-to-wall ratio, window glass, roof construction, shading elements. Also, we have PV down here. We put PV down at the bottom because we do want you to optimize an energy efficient building before considering renewables, but it is there, so it is important. Now, what do these factors do? Remember in Format, I didn't specify anything. I set my location and my geometry, and that was it. So here's where we can start to set things like our lighting efficiency. Now, in typical ways of energy modeling and performance modeling, whether you're working in Revit or any other tool, You set one specific value, even if you're very early in the design stage. What is your lighting efficiency? You have to set one value, then you press Analyze, and you get one number back. That's great if you know exactly what your building settings are going to be. If you don't, and oftentimes very early in the design process, you don't know exactly what R value you're going to use for your walls or what your lighting efficiency is going to be, that can be a little bit of a troublesome workflow. So what we've done here is each of these dots represents a different lighting efficiency, 1.9 watts per square foot, 1.1, etc. And now we can see the cause and effect feedback of selecting different lighting efficiencies. So here we are, 0.3, pretty efficient. What happens if we go to the highest option, 1.9? So that changed. Our energy cost mean changed, and actually it means we don't mean ASHRAE 90.1 anymore because it is much higher energy cost mean. $1.75 versus $1.03. That's a pretty big change. Now we can move these around and we can see the live feedback of what all of this means. Now, early in the design process, we probably don't know exactly what our lighting efficiency is going to be, so we can set a range, and that's going to roll up an average value to this number. Let's look at this dial again. So right now we're at $1.19 per square foot. If we kind of leave it at this range, we can see all the way up here, our range is $2.03. What that means is we could make a lot of inefficient design decisions. Maybe if we cranked, our lighting efficiency and all the other factors up to the least efficient decision, and have an energy cost around $2.03. Or we could make a lot of energy efficient decisions, making sure we're reducing plug loads and reducing anything that's going to be inefficient for our building. And looks like up here, end up with an energy cost around 47 cents a square foot. Here's where working with cost metrics is really helpful in communicating with the owner. You can show them instantly the cause and effect feedback of accepting different design changes. Now, of course, the benchmarks are also built in here. I can see where ASHRAE 90.1 is, as well as the 2030 benchmark. We need to get to 53 cents per square foot to reach architecture 2030, so we still have a ways to go. Now, lighting efficiency is one example, and I want to show you a different example, window-to-wall ratio. Now, remember, we didn't specify in Format. You don't have to specify in Revit either. If you are using a more detailed Revit model that I'll show you, it will take that into account. But imagine if you wanted to test different window-to-wall ratios early in the design process, you would have to manually model these each and every time you wanted to test one. Model something with 15% window-to-wall ratio, press Analyze, get your one number. Model something with 40% window-to-wall ratio, press Analyze, get your one number, and so on and so forth. And that's really time-consuming. So now you can instantly see what the impact is for all these different window-to-wall ratios. And again, if you're not sure, set a range. Now you can work through these different factors, set what you know, set what you don't know, and continue working through them. And along the way, you can see the model history. This is tracking everything that we've changed along the way. So you can essentially see, are you making a change for better or for worse? You can also start to bookmark things. So if I bookmark this, this is going to save the dashboard in this exact state with all of these settings. Now I had already saved some, and I can compare these all now. So I can see here's where I started, here's where I maximized operations, here's maybe where I did energy efficient envelope construction, and start to tell your design story of how you're getting to your goal. In this process, I wasn't able to get to my Architecture 2030 goal until I added the PV, which can be common for some locations and in some projects. We understand it's not always easy to get it with just, so we added PV. But you can see, you can start to tell your design story here. Some other powerful things you can do. Now, remember, this is just a really simple math. I didn't do any internal zoning or anything. But I can visualize things like heating and cooling loads. And these are powered by Energy Plus, which is really the gold standard energy analysis engine. And historically, this type of information for a really simple math has been hard to get this early in the design process. Let me just explode this a little bit here. So we can see we automatically do core and perimeter zoning without you specifying anything. Now the way it works is if you had specified some zoning, we would certainly use that, but if you didn't specify anything, we're going to use this kind of zoning. And you can start to click here on these different zones and see what the peak loading qualities are going to be, the floor area, and start to understand. Do the same thing with cooling loads. Start to understand maybe where there's going to be problem areas in your model, maybe areas that are going to be susceptible to overheating, or they're going to be really cold in the winter time, and just start to get some good basic information. You can also start to do some PV analysis. Now this is a flat roof, so I don't expect the results to be too exciting, but basically anything that's going to be yellow is going to have a good potential for PV. Anything that's gray is going to be not so good. And we can also click here. This information is rolling up from those PV factors that I set down at the bottom, considering payback period and what the surface area is going to be. Is it going to cover 90% of the roof or only 70% of the roof? So you can work through these factors and start to get a pretty good idea of what your building performance is going to be really early in the design process. Now this is critical. You can also start to use it in this scenario, right? I made 3 different masses. So now we can really easily compare different forms. And those scenarios that I saved previously and compared, I can also compare those, so I can level the playing field here and say, okay, I want to apply a high efficiency HVAC system to all 3 of these models and see who is going to have the best performance, which model. It looks like they're all pretty close, but it looks like this U-shaped model here is going to have a lower opportunity. We can see the minimum is 0.2, and so it's going to have a lower opportunity for savings. So you can apply those different scenarios here. Now, if you're doing the AIA 2030 commitment and you need to report to DDX, you know you have to report at specific goals along the way, specific stages. We've made that easy. So if you are a 2030 commitment firm, you do have a login, you just need to go into your account and enter that login into services, and that will link your DDX account and your Insight account. And from there, it's as simple as pressing report to DDX. Then you're going to get a summary of all the information that's submitted. So this project name is Office Math Study, and all that information that you would otherwise have to manually enter into your DDX entry, we're pulling it out for you based off of what you've set in Insight 360. So it's pulling your location, it's pulling that lighting power density, the baseline EUI, the predicted EUI, everything that's been automatically done for you in Insight 360. Press send, and that will submit it. I have the DDX window open here, so let me just refresh it. Here we are, Office Math Study. Now we can see, when we open it up here, all that information is automatically done for us. So this is the project phase, this is conceptual, but you can see that you're going to have to report for some other phases as well. But it's a really good way to start making reporting more regular. It's not such a tedious task anymore, and you can start to integrate it more seamlessly in your process and make it really more part of the design process rather than something you do at the end of the year. So the last piece I want to show you is I showed you on a very simple math model, but I also want to show you, oftentimes this is kind of the level of Revit model that we're working with more. Insight 360 works from Revit as well. It works on these types of detailed models as well. If you want to do a mass or some kind of schematic where you have masses and building elements or just building elements, it will work on all of those different kinds of models. To use Insight 360 with Revit, you just need to grab the Insight 360 plugin. It's free to grab, so there's no reason not to. And then it's right the same as in Format. You just press Generate Insight. Again, you only need to provide us with your geometry and your location. That being said, if you want to build in thermal properties, maybe you're a much more detailed design phase, you want to build in more detailed thermal properties, you absolutely can, and Insight will absolutely use those. So really, like I said, the way it works is if there's detail in the model, we'll use it. Insight 360 will use it. If not, don't worry, you're not going to get invalid results. We're just going to set some defaults for you, like the thermal zoning, or you can work in the Insight interface to work with things like your R value and your window to wall ratio. So I'm going to switch back over to PowerPoint, and we're going to I'll kind of give you a summary, and then I'll open it up 4 questions. So how does Insight 360 relate to the 2030 goals, especially those tenets that I mentioned earlier? So the one about requiring all employees to become educated, that's a big investment for a firm. And it's also, not everyone is going to be an expert, and that's okay. What we want to do is with Insight 360 and a lot of other tools we're working on is provide access to this expert information and use that information to help inform the design decisions. It's okay if you're not an expert. How can we leverage Insight 360 and how can we use it to help point you in the right direction? Engage clients in discussions relating to energy efficiency. Hopefully you saw that the Insight 360 interface, especially when we're talking about costs and trade-offs. What I didn't show you is how you can just type in someone's email and invite them to the project, and you all can collaborate on that real time, making it a lot easier to share early findings and avoid kind of those hiccups and those bigger problems that are going to come later. An approaching project at every stage of development, really analysis early and often. Use tools to help tell the story and track progress. It's really easy just to do the most simple math, but also continue checking in. And with that AIA DDX reporting capability, we're hoping that it makes that a lot easier for you to check in along the way. So some closing notes that I had. Availability. So Insight 360 is available in a range of ways. The first is as a Revit subscription benefit through the Building Design Suite, and it also sounds like the team will be having an upcoming webinar about AEC collections. It's also available through that. You just need an A360 account, Revit 2016 or above, and the Revit plugin. The Revit plugin is free to get, and you can press that generate button inside as much as you want. It doesn't use cloud credits or anything, so there is really no reason not to do this, in my opinion. It's also available through Format 360 Pro, so if you have Format 360 Pro, you have access to using Insight 360 that way as well. You can just need an A360 account and one of the applications to access Format. The last one is through sharing insights. So this is really the key way for owners or clients to be a part of the discussion. And like I said, they might not have a Revit subscription or they might not have Format Pro. But basically all they need is an A360 account, which is free to get. They just sign up at autodesk.com. And then you can invite them to any project just simply by typing in their address. They'll get a link, an invitation, and they can interact directly on the Insight 360 website with their results. Now, resources. If you're interested in learning more about Architecture 2030 or the AIA 2030 commitment, there are first 2 links. If you want to know more about Insight 360 or just start to play around with it, we actually have sample projects up there. So you don't even, if you just want to start to play around with it, you absolutely can. For that, you just go to Insight 360, the homepage. I'm going to log out because you experience it in your logged out stage. And then just go to Insight once you're at the homepage. And there are some projects here that you can play around with and experience yourself. So I encourage you, play around with it. And once you do have a project that you think you want to try Insight 360 with, go ahead, through Revit or Format, press that Generate Insight button, and then you will see it. So with that, I will pause. I think we can take some questions from any on the line. Otherwise, I'm happy to maybe show you some more of the capabilities, or whatever it is that I have Revit kicked off. If you want to show anything extra. Oh, any questions?
Stephanie, thank you very much. Again, this is Mark Mincy. Again, it was a great presentation. We appreciate your enthusiasm and all the tools that Autodesk is using to help customers meet the 2030 challenge. Did want to encourage people online to, if you have any questions, please put that into the questions panel and we will try to answer those questions. So, if you do that now, and we will get to those. Do you have a great question to start out with? How does Insight 360 relate to other Autodesk sustainable design tools like Green Building Studio?
That's a great question. Like I mentioned earlier, Insight 360 really came about in November of last year at Greenbuild, but it was also a culmination of a lot of these different tools. So the easiest way to explain it is Green Building Studio is still around. It hasn't gone away, and it is actually the analysis engine behind Insight 360. So if you ever use Green Building Studio, just know that Insight 360 is kind of a new wrapper, a new way to interface with those results, but it's still a very powerful energy analysis engine that is backing and supporting all of the results that you're getting through Insight 360.
Thank you very much for that answer. I did have another question. We're kind of pushing the envelope here, but someone asked, can you access Insight 360 from InfraWorks?
Oh, that's a good one. So not seamlessly today, but we are absolutely looking at it. A big part of the 2030 challenge is understanding districts and the urban scale, right? Looking beyond just one building performance. So I think online, if you kind of Google rapid energy modeling, so there's some work being done there with InfraWorks and some different really exciting projects that are larger at a campus-wide scale. And it's, it's kind of confusing. It's called rapid energy modeling, but Insight 360 is supporting all of the analysis there. So I recommend looking up. There was a really great article recently. Look up rapid energy modeling and Autodesk, and there's some really interesting work being done that's tying all of this great information to InfraWorks.
Thank you. I have another question here. Aside from 2030 benchmarking and reporting, what else can Insight 360 tell me?
Yeah, so we certainly focused on the 2030 aspects, given the nature of this webinar. But also, there's a range, aside from just kind of the energy modeling and understanding heating and cooling loads, there's daylighting aspects, so that's built into Revit. I can also just, since we have some time, let me just show you some of those views. So this is illuminance data. This is from Insight 360, that panel. This Generate Insight piece over here is what we talked about today, but there's also lighting and solar analysis. So these are daylighting results visualized in your model, understanding what the light levels are in your model. You can do natural daylighting. You can include electric lighting. There's a range of possibilities you can study there. You can also start to look at things like, solar analysis. So this view here is a solar PV. I showed you that earlier in the Insight interface, but you can also do it directly in Revit. You can actually see here on that angled roof surface, we kind of have some gray, which is not so great opportunity for PV. There's a little bit of self-shading going on. We can also start to look at, the shading implications of these shades here and start to do that. So there's a lot of different things that you can start to do and study, some of them in the Insight interface and some of them directly in the Revit context.
Sorry, fabulous. I do have one last question here, but again, encourage anybody who has any questions, feel free to write that in the chat pane or the questions pane. How can my firm sign up for the 2030 challenge or the AIA 2030 commitment?
Right, so if you're not already signed up, I highly encourage you to. It's a great initiative to be a part of. And honestly, it's one of those, everyone else is doing it too, so you should as well if you're not already. These links here, where you can learn more about the 2030 challenge and the 2030 commitment, is also where you can start to sign on to these challenges.